What is the 3DO Blaster anyway? Well, it stands for 3-dimensional optics, which doesn't say much about it, but I reckon most of you know what it is. Some of you may think it's some version of 3dfx Voodoo card or some graphics card from Creative Labs, and some of you have no idea. Long story short, it's this: the Panasonic 3DO video game console crammed into a single PC ISA card. To make it clear, Panasonic did not develop the console, as many people think. It was actually a 3DO company who sold the license to various other companies, who then made the actual console. I've tracked down a number of different models: Panasonic, Goldstar, Sanyo, some Korean company called DMB, LG, even AT&T was trying to get on the 3DO bandwagon, never released it though, as well as Samsung. Some of those were just rebrands. And of course, Creative Labs with this ISA card. The 3DO Blaster is based on the first Panasonic model, which is this one. The 3DO console first came out in 1993, and as such it belongs to the 5th generation of consoles, alongside with PlayStation, Saturn and Nintendo 64. Compared to the mentioned consoles, it failed miserably. It sold only 2 million units worldwide, while PlayStation, for instance, sold 100 million more. First, it was overpriced. The initial price was whopping $700 which is over $1,500 today, compared to, for instance, PlayStation, which cost only $300 a year later, was not exactly competitive. Second, there were almost no games for the console. Moby Games reports 254 of them, and the games that actually came out were either horrible or ports from other systems. There were about 100 exclusive games for the 3DO, and most of them are digitized mess. This game is absolutely atrocious. Graphics are shit, gameplay is rubbish, and music is horrible. Moreover, it's copyrighted on YouTube, so you have to enjoy this marvel of a game without sound. And don't worry, you're not missing on anything. I've just saved you from getting yourself a brain aneurysm. Probably the worst of them all is this one, Seal of the Pharaoh. It's clearly one of the worst games I've ever played. I was playing the game for about 5 minutes, running about some pyramid, killing these dildos or whatever that is, but even 5 minutes was too much. I couldn't stand it any longer. Hardware-wise, however, it was astonishing for the year. Demos were rather impressive, but in the end, not many developers put the 3DO's power to use. The 3DO Blaster came out in 1994 and cost $400. A bit too much, you still needed an additional CD drive and a sound card. And some computer, of course. To make it work, you need 2 ISA slots, one for the card itself and one for a sound card. Then you need one additional slot for a VGA card, which needs to be equipped with a feature connector. Either type is fine. If you have watched my unboxing video, I mentioned there it needs one specific CD drive to work, and that's Creative CR563. At least that's what the specs say. But I naturally reckoned it would be, well, retarded to make the card work only with one specific CD drive out of 15 billion available out there. So I took all my CD drives and started testing them one by one. And bloody hell, none of them actually worked. Then I found out the Creative CR563 is actually rebranded Matsushita drive, which was used in the Panasonic. At least it's very close relative. So I thought to myself, what if it's not limited to one specific drive, but rather a manufacturer? I went online and bought a bunch of these. They are very similar in design and model number. Well, long story short, none of them worked. The closest model number I've managed to find was CR562, which has the same connectors, jumper settings, everything, and this is what the driver said when I connected the drive, or pretty much any drive but the Creative one. The specs also say it needs Creative Sound Blaster 16 or All32 to get it working, which seems like another bollocks. So I naturally tried some non-creative sound cards like the Gravis Ultrasound Plug and Play, and again, long story short, it worked. The 3DO Blaster doesn't check for a Sound Blaster presence in the system, it just needs a sound card with a CD-in connector, and that's it. There are some jumpers on the board for setting up a port address, IRQ and drive ID, but I left all of them alone at default settings for now. I'm gonna come back to them later on. This long port is for a video CD decoder add-on, which was never released since the 3DO Blaster sold so poorly. Not to mention the video CD itself was a failed format. Panasonic was selling these video CD add-ons which go to the slots here. The box contains lots of cables and stuff needed for the card to work properly, so setting it all up takes some time. Now let's go through it step by step. The very first step is putting the card into a slot, of course, and connecting the 3DO Blaster to a VGA card through its feature connector. Then I have to connect a pass-through VGA cable, and here goes a monitor. This port is for a controller. It's got only one port though, as well as the Panasonic 3DO console. Then this connector is for the Creative CD drive. It needs a standard ID ribbon cable, and to be able to listen to audio CD, I need to connect the CD drive and the 3DO Blaster through this cable. Now, since the only audio output is on a sound card, I need to connect the 3DO Blaster to a sound card with this cable through audio CD in. And of course, out of all CD audio connectors, Creative had to put in the most uncommon one, which I didn't have. There was one cable with this connector inside the packaging, but you need two. I reckon the other cable would be inside the original CD drive packaging if I had one. I've got a cable with a bit similar connector, but it's got only 3 pins instead of 4, and thus is a little bit smaller, but it fit and didn't bend the last remaining pin in the CD drive. Also, the left and right channels are reversed on this connector, so I had to flip the wires. And that's it, it's ready for software installation. The card works only under Windows 3 or 11, and the installation was proper hell. First, I've put the 3DO Blaster to my test rig, that slot 1 motherboard with BX chipset. I ran setup with a freshly installed Windows 3.11, and right from the get-go, it just didn't detect the card. I tried changing a port address from the default to something else, I tried changing an IRQ, I tried all possible combinations of those two, I spent a couple of hours messing about the card, changing jumpers, BIOS settings, memory managers, etc. And in the end, I put the card in a Socket 7 motherboard and it worked right away. Installation went smoothly, it added some stuff to config.sys and AutoExec and it was ready to go. Or was it? Since it was a new Windows installation, I couldn't be bothered to install a proper driver for the VGA card I was using, which was number 9 with S3 Vision chipset, and I used just a standard VGA driver included in Windows. After a reboot, I fired up Windows and ran this utility for adjusting the 3DO Blaster's picture. It's got lots of settings, I messed about with all of them until the picture was perfect. Then I quit the utility and fired up the 3DO program. It was working perfectly fine, but the Windows VGA driver uses 640 by 480 resolution and 8-bit colors. Since the 3DO works in 320 by 240, the resolution is not an issue. What is an issue though is the 8-bit color mode, which is only 256 colors, while the 3DO games can display millions of colors. Naturally, I wanted the best possible result, so I've installed a proper driver for the S3 Vision, set the windows to 800 by 600 in 64,000 colors, and it didn't work. Whatever I tried in the overlay utility, I just couldn't get it working, and not even in 640 by 480 and 256 colors. It was weird, so I switched back to the VGA driver and it was working fine again. So, I switched the VGA card for also number 9, but with S3 Trio 64 this time, set the driver to the default VGA to see if it's working, and it was. Then I installed the S3 driver and first tried to use 640 by 480 and 256 colors. It was working this time, I was chuffed. I went to the Windows setup, set the colors to 64,000 and again nothing. I tried about 15 different VGA cards, PCI and ISA, none of them worked in 64,000 color mode. Some of them didn't work even with the standard VGA Windows driver. One card had a weird feature. When I enabled its feature connector, it disabled 64,000 colors for some reason. When I was about to give up and use just 8-bit colors, Canada came to the rescue, the ATI Mark 64. Now, it's working perfectly, but since I always want a larger or bigger desktop, I set it to 800 by 600. The problem is, the picture seems somewhat worse. Have a look at this comparison.
Round 1, fight! Hong Kong!
Moreover, it's got this weird screen tearing when scrolling up and down. It's most probably due to the resolution not being exact multiple of 320 by 240, so 640 by 480 it is. I also tried 1024 by 768, and it's not exactly stellar either. Speaking of picture quality, since I've got it set up, let's make a simple picture comparison between the original 3DO, the 3DO Blaster and an emulator. Since the 3DO doesn't have any RGB output, only S-Video and Composite, the 3DO Blaster should produce much better picture, theoretically. I'm not gonna use a tele or a monitor for the 3DO, I'm gonna use a capture card to get the best possible image for the comparison. Now the 3DO Blaster would look great if it didn't look so bad. It's got this over-contrasted picture, or there's too much gamma, or whatever, it's just clearly too bright. The picture looks alright, pixel-wise, it's sharp but highlights are overblown and colors are washed out, so even though the Panasonic outputs the video through S-Video and it's not as sharp, the final image is much better. And of course the emulator is pretty much what the image looks like straight out of hardware.
君の行く手を阻む強敵が次々と襲いかかる。ドラゴンを倒し王女を救え。ファンタジーアドベンチャーゲームドラゴンズレア。
I tried to fix the image with some color settings in the ATI control panel, And while I could adjust colors and gamma for everything else, it didn't have any impact on the 3DO Blasters picture. The picture is set up, sound's working, now the controller. And the controller is anything but good. Its D-pad is uncomfortable to press and quite imprecise. Playing for example Street Fighter 2 is a real pain. Buttons are not much better, they feel really cheap. Well, the whole controller looks and feels cheap compared to the controller from the Panasonic console. Let's have a gander at the back of the controllers and you'll understand where the problem lies. The Panasonic controller is made by Matsushita, which is basically Panasonic, and it's made in Japan. The 3DO Blasters controller is made by Logitech and made in bloody China. The controller's connector is a standard 9-pin connector that was used in pretty much everything made in that time. So I tried to stick in the Panasonic controller and it, unsurprisingly, worked fine. Playing games got immediately better. Then how about even better controller? Unfortunately, this one didn't work. What's absolutely cracking though, the 3DO Blaster can use your computer's keyboard and it's working marvels. Me personally, I always prefer keyboard over any gamepad. The Panasonic 3DO can read CDRs, so if needed you can always burn some 3DO game and use it in the console. Unfortunately, the Creative CD drive can't read CDRs. Maybe it's an old weak laser, but it doesn't work. Both of these were made for a Japanese market and I was using Japanese games to test them. The question is, can they read games for, let's say, European market? The Panasonic is region unlocked, so yes, it can.
Als ich in die Spalte fiel, erkannte ich, dass das Buch entgegen meinen Plänen nicht zerstört werden würde.
Now let's try the 3DO Blaster. And the Creative CD drive doesn't want to read the bloody CD. Maybe its laser is really too weak, but all Japanese games work fine. The thing is, it's not even trying to read the CD, or at least reject it, so I'm not really sure if it can or cannot read different regions. Now, something very interesting happened to me while I was getting the Myst. I've bought the game from a German bloke, and when I unpacked the parcel, there was a little surprise. This and this. It made my day and got me interested. There was this little message in there. Great YouTube channel, keep up the good work. Cheers mate, I will. Greetings, Remute. That's always nice to hear. Now, I've never heard of Remute 3D for 3DO, and when you flip it around, 2024, and it got me interested even more. Who and why would make a 3DO game nowadays? Well, there seems to be a singer on the cover, and the bloke is signed as Remute on the message, so I reckon it must be him. I found him on the Bandcamp, so yeah, he's a composer and does this thing for lots of retro hardware such as Mega Drive, Nintendo 64, Jag, you name it. So let's put the CD in the blaster then and let's see what it's about. And unfortunately the bloody CD drive has got problems reading it, except for this splash screen, so Panasonic it is. Let's check the game out. bet his music is not my cup of tea, but if you fancy it, go ahead and check his Bandcamp out. And the last thing I want to cover is the audio CD. The Panasonic can play audio CDs in its own player, even the controller is adapted for audio CDs. It's got these engraved symbols for next track, fast forward, etc. The 3DO Blasters controller has the same symbols, which may indicate you can expect a similar player and functionality, but you'd be mistaken, it can't play audio CDs only if it's part of a game. If you insert audio CD, it gets rejected. To wrap this up, it was very interesting to play about with the 3DO Blaster, but was it worth buying in 1994? Hell no, it wasn't. It was too pricey, the picture quality was rubbish, the controller was rubbish, it needed stupid proprietary CD drive that couldn't read CDRs and was only double speed, couldn't play audio CDs, video CDs, had lots of problems with different VGA cards and worked only in Windows 3. The only advantage it had over the console was it could use a computer's keyboard. Now, is it worth buying nowadays? Well, yeah, if you're a collector. It's a very nice collector's item and an interesting piece of history. Is it worth buying to play those 4 games that have been released? It's extremely rare, and if you manage to find one with all its accessories, it's bloody pricey, plus you must find the Creative CR563, which is not as rare but can get bloody pricey as well. I reckon it's much better to use one of the consoles out there, or an emulator. Both of those have much better picture quality, it's less hassle setting them up, and the consoles are much cheaper. And that's it for the video. If you want to give some 3DO games a try, I've used an emulator called 4DO, it works great. Have a great time, massive shout out to all my patrons, and see you next time, cheers.